Hello and welcome to Exposed News Outlet. My name is Andrea and I'll be your host. Before we get started, I'd like to ask if you could please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And be sure to check the notification bell for all the latest updates and videos. Also, if you could please like my video and share it on your social media platform if you have one. I would really appreciate it. It helps to get my message out to the masses and get the facts out. Especially this close to the election, it's very important that people know the facts and aren't misled by disinformation. And today's video is very important. It's about Project 2025 and their mandate for authoritarianism in America, changing it from a democracy to a dictatorship, and MAGA's extreme agenda, as well as all of the Republicans in office moving forward. For the last 4 years, since being fired by over 81 million Americans, the Heritage Group and other conservative elite billionaire groups drastically out of touch with American values and frankly even Christian values, despite being conservative white nationalist pro-Christian groups, pushing an anti-Christian agenda of racism, xenophobia, homophobia, as well as transphobia, whom are threatened by the veil being lifted up as all of the history's dark secrets and the evil actions of those are being brought to the light during this time as Earth is ascending into the fourth and fifth dimensions. And it has exposed many of these corrupt individuals, especially the political right-wing neo-Nazis pushing discrimination and white nationalism, cult ideology, disinformation, lies, literally trying to dumb down the masses, rewrite history and the facts. And as if history hasn't been whitewashed enough of the past, just when we were working towards righting our wrongs from our past, Heritage Group and the MAGA cult aim to dismantle all the agencies and progress institutions that have been put into place simply because they are too inclusive. And they want to restrict all positions of power strictly to straight white men. They also seek to end all DEI, which stands for diversity, equality, and inclusion positions of power, and completely reshape the system's terminology and revert backwards 50 years of progress, which I might add that it's 50 years of progress that were hard fought by civil rights individuals that even lost their lives fighting for the causes, and even many wars that were fought for these causes. It's just a blatant disrespect to our country and the Constitution. I'm going to show a clip here.
J.D. Vance says not only do conservatives need to, in his words, wake up, but what they need to wake up to is the fact that most of American life and culture should be, in his words, ripped out like a tumor. Those are, again, his words, not mine. Watch.
Our leaders right now are so corrupt and so vile that if you assimilate into their culture, you're assimilating into like garbage liberal elite culture. You're not assimilating into traditional American culture. And so this is a tough pickle for me. I don't even know what the right answer is here, because you can't just teach these things. You can't teach that we live in a great country if the leaders are actively aligned against it. So almost the thing that you need to do, step one in the process, is to totally replace, like rip out like a tumor, the current American leadership class, and then reinstall some sense of American, political religion.
We need to rip it out like a tumor and then install political religion. Man who is interviewing J.D. Vance here gets very excited about this idea, and it leads, this is important here, it leads J.D. Vance to explain sort of influences on his thought, where he gets his ideas on subjects like this.
You said something that I would like to zero down on. How do we effectively, quote, rip out the disgusting leadership class?
Oh, man. I mean, you know,
because let me expand on that just a second, because and I'm going to give you a little cover here, because it's not just, I mean, obviously elections, that's one thing. Okay. But unfortunately, this evil leadership class has already taken over all of our institutions. Current pipeline is to turn them into those people that we just called evil and disgusting. How do we, aside from elections, how do we rip out this leadership class? So these institutions are corrupted and rotted to the core. This elite ideology is everywhere and in all the things. What other options do we have besides voting them out, which we're seeing is ineffectual?
Yeah. So again, this is like a tough question, but this is maybe the question that confronts us right now. You know, there's this guy, Curtis Yarvin, who's written about some of these things.
Knowing chuckle there. There's this guy, Curtis Yarvin, who's written about some of these things. This is Curtis Yarvin, who J.D. Vance is citing here as he is talking about the need to, seize the universities, use the government to destroy businesses who aren't right wing, talking about needing to rip out the American system like a tumor. Here's the guy he is citing as his sort of the source of his thinking on these matters.
So I've reduced this very complicated problem to a simple 4-letter acronym, which is RAGE. And RAGE stands for Retire All Government Employees. Very, very simple. Now, the problem with this is, why have you never heard this before? Why has no one ever suggested, let's just get rid of this thing? You have a government in Washington. You're either for it or against it. What is government? A government is just a corporation which owns a country. Nothing more, nothing less. It so happens that our sovereign corporation is very poorly managed. And there's a very simple way to replace that, which is what we do to all corporations that have failed. We simply delete them. We haven't been able to do that with our government for 200 years. So it's gotten a little bit stale.
We should delete the U.S. government because it's stale. It has been around for too long. We haven't been able to do that, meaning delete our government for 200 years, so it's gotten a bit stale. It's been around too long. So what would that entail, deleting the U.S. government?
The other thing about getting rid of your government is you can't just say, well, the limits of the government are the limits of the formal government. You have to say, well, what is the system actually? And it includes a lot of things that are called NGOs, things that are called universities, things that are funded by the state. It's a very, very large system, and it all needs to be destroyed. Fortunately, there's a lot of talented Americans who actually know how to run things and make things work and are generalists. And you can just get these people, put them in a position of responsibility, and have them do their thing. And finally, you need a CEO. And a national CEO is what's called a dictator. It's the same thing. There's no difference between a CEO and a dictator. If Americans want to change their government, they're going to have to get over their dictator phobia.
If Americans want to change their government, they're going to have to get over their dictator phobia. Miller. So the vice presidential candidates debate is tomorrow. Tim Walz, the Democratic candidate, has been governor, is currently the governor of Minnesota. He's been a long-term congressman, high school teacher, football coach, a soldier for decades. J.D. Vance, the Republican candidate, is a different kind of cat, forgive me. Aside from a brief stint in the Marine Corps, where he served with a public affairs unit, he has spent his entire adult life working for or being financially supported by eccentric right-wing tech billionaires, specifically ones who have devoted themselves to the political teachings of this guy.
Finally, you need a CEO, and a national CEO is what's called a dictator. It's the same thing.
I have debated whether or not to talk about this on the show because I feel like it gives me the oogs. But I also feel like this is an important thing to know about the Republicans' vice presidential nominee and what he has to offer and why he was brought onto the ticket despite his palpable lack of political skill or likability, his lack of any track record in politics whatsoever. And after he spent less than 2 years in the only public office he's ever held, which is a Senate seat that he only barely won thanks to one of those eccentric tech billionaires giving him the single largest Senate campaign donation in the history of this country. I mean, he comes wholly from this very, very obscure, eccentric, right-wing subculture of tech billionaires. And his relationship with this eccentric Silicon Valley pro-dictatorship philosophy has been pretty widely discussed in print. These are a whole bunch of articles that have discussed this at one level or another. It's been discussed in print, but I don't feel like it's widely understood by the country who is paying attention to this guy as a candidate. But this is where J.D. Vance's big ideas come from about where the country is heading for. Quote, Vance is friends with Curtis Yarvin, whom he openly cites as a political influence. Yarvin, the main political influence on all of the people who have supported J.D. Vance throughout his career, including paying to install him in the U.S. Senate. When J.D. Vance says stuff like we're in a late Republican period, which is something he says all the time, he doesn't mean anything about the Republican Party. He means we're at the time right before the Roman Republic collapsed. And what happened after the Roman Republic collapsed? Well, a dictator, Caesar, came in, and wasn't that better? He talks about being in a late Republican period all the time. That's him channeling this guy, Yarvin. When Vance says universities are the enemy and they should be seized, he's not only channeling Elizabeth Dilling and Alan Zoll and all the weird far-right crusaders against the universities from the 30s and 40s. That would be troubling enough. He's also channeling this guy, Yarvin, who says that while we are firing all the government employees, we should do the same to the universities because they're all part of the bigger system that all needs to be destroyed. He says, quote, retire their employees and liquidate their assets. Universities in particular have lovely campuses, many of which are centrally located and should be quite attractive to developers. Meaning, let's put somebody in to be a, what does he call it? CEO, a national CEO, which he says is indistinguishable from a dictator. And then the dictator should take over all the universities and sell them off to developers. This is literally a pro-dictatorship, pro-monarchy philosophy that is not just about ending the U.S. system of government, deleting the U.S. government, but then using the power of a dictator to dismantle universities, dismantle businesses, to dismantle all of civil society, to instead install a whole new system controlled by the state that serves just the desires of the dear leader.
Think that, unfortunately, a lot of people on the left have leaned into this by trying to categorize people by skin color and then give special benefits or special amounts of discrimination. The Harris administration, for example, handed out farm benefits to people based on skin color. I think that's disgraceful. I don't think we should say you get farm benefits if you're a black farmer, you don't get farm benefits if you're a white farmer. All farmers, we want to thrive.
That's Donald Trump's running mate trying to tell us that he doesn't see color, except those black farmers he's complaining about don't have that luxury. For like a century, black farmers have been blocked from accessing federal subsidies, debt forgiveness, and other programs that have been a lifeline for white farmers. J.D. Vance is lying to you when he says white farmers don't get benefits. Under Trump, just 0.1% or $20 million of pandemic relief funding went to black farmers. The rest of the $26 billion went to white farmers. The racial disparity was so egregious that just 2 weeks ago, the Biden administration did indeed begin distributing $2 billion to thousands of black farmers who had previously been denied. Republicans like Vance and Trump advisor Stephen Miller, who is tangentially connected to Project 2025, have made it a point to block these disbursements. In Project 2025, folks like Miller, Vance, and Trump want to nationalize their long-term goal of putting a stop to what they call anti-white racism, which is just another way of saying we're sick of America being held accountable for actual racism. Under Project 2025, the Department of Justice would play the central role in executing their national policy of reversing racial progress. They would force the DOJ's Civil Rights Division, which is responsible for enforcing federal statutes that prohibit discrimination based on race, color, or religion, or sex, disability, or national origin, to refocus, moving away from what they call affirmative discrimination and ensure, quote, lawfulness, which essentially means protecting the people who've had access and opportunity all along. Joining me now is Michael Harriot, columnist for The Grio and host of the Grio Daily podcast, and someone who has read the whole 900 some odd page Project 2025. So talk to us about this idea of reversing the federal civil rights administration to serve the people who've always been served in America.
Yeah, so one of the things that Project 2025 wants to do, and I want to be clear about it, because not only did I read the entire Project 2025, I read Agenda 47 and pointed out that Project 2025 is essentially a instruction manual for Agenda 47. So both things reflect these issues. And what they want to do is remove the Civil Rights Division of every federal department. People don't know that, the Department of Housing and Urban Development has a Civil Rights Department of Education. And so what they want to do is eliminate these, and they want to refocus on basically anti-white, anti-Christian, and that's the important part, anti-Christian discrimination. So, for instance, if you allow your employers allow their employees to have insurance that allows them access to abortion or reproductive health care, that is discrimination against Christians in under Project 2025. And there's a whole litany of anti-LGBTQ, anti-Black, anti-everything but white Christians sprinkled throughout Project 2025.
And so the idea, I guess, basically is that the federal government's role, which has been corrective in the 20th century, trying to shore up the rights of Black folks, brown folks, LGBTQ people, women, they're saying, no, that's wrong. We have to go back to having the federal government serve only white Christians, or at least to make them give them preference or give them preferential treatment.
The interesting thing is that, first of all, there really aren't that many race-specific programs in America. Right. So what they want to do essentially is continue the discrimination, not just, remain stagnant, but continue the discrimination and erase any progress. They want to not just stop the fixing of the problem. Right. They want to revert back to the eras when we ignored the problem. And that's a lot of what's contained in Project 2025. There's a section on the Department of Defense, right, that talks about the military. And it says it wants the military to stop essentially being woke. And it uses those words, woke, right?
Yeah.
And revert to the demographics that reflected the country in 1974. Now, if you didn't know this, there is this whole right-wing conspiracy that the military is getting too non-white, right? Like there are too many Black officers, there are too many Hispanic officers. And so they want, when they say pre-1974 demographics, what they're talking about is when the draft was legal and the military was white. And so they use those kinds of code words that you kind of have to decipher through this white-wing propaganda, because they have right-wing propagandists who wrote this basically white manifesto.
Yeah, let's play J.D. Vance, who's on the side of all of this. And here he is talking about the Civil Rights Act.
And if you understand what the Civil Rights Act was aiming to do, and then what it did, and you compare them, it's kind of insane when you actually just put it in like, when I realized this, the light bulb went off. This is what I realized. The United States passed a law that said you're not allowed to discriminate against people based on the color of their skin. And the bureaucracy that was set up to enforce that law has forced private and public sector entities to discriminate against people based on the color of their skin.
So for J.D. Vance to fix that, Project 2025 would remove terms like diversity, equity, and inclusion from all federal rules, regulations, contracts, grants, and legislation, end SNAP, which feeds hungry people, end student loan forgiveness and increase monthly payments, end the program that requires federal contractors to comply with anti-discrimination laws so they could discriminate, overhaul Minority Business Development Agency, meaning no more grants and loans to minority businesses of color, overhaul public housing, enforce work requirements, enforce the death penalty more vigorously, terminate any unnecessary consent decrees, meaning police agencies that have been found to disproportionately kill people of color. Thoughts?
Right. And the most interesting thing about it is they want to eliminate this idea called disparate impact, right? That says, like, you don't have to be, use the N-word or just intentionally mean to discriminate, right? The impact of a policy is what makes it racist. But they want to eliminate that. And they have this stuff sprinkled all through Project 2025 that intentionally targets non-Black and non-white. Well, everybody who's not white and not Christian.
There you go. Michael Harriot, my friend, thank you.
With Project 2025, they want to remove everything from the National Weather Service, NOAA, to the Department of Education. Ban education that speaks about Native Americans, Black history, which, by the way, is American history, and these are just the facts. They're trying to whitewash it once again and remove it completely from any education in our public schools. And a lot of these are included in the book bans that have already been implemented in a lot of the Republican-run districts and states. They're even denying that this country was built on the backs of slaves, which is a fact. And even the Capitol building and the White House were built by slaves that were hardworking individuals, and they're trying to deny those facts and trying to paint a new picture for the youth for indoctrination and mind control while they push an authoritarian dictatorship, much like Mussolini and Hitler. I'm going to play the clip here.
I am the most stable human being. Remember they said a stable genius. I am the most stable human being. I've been doing this for a long time. I hate to talk that way, but we can't let this woman get in. It's two people, and she's and you talk about unstable, she's a whack job.
He also let it slip that some people over at Fox helped write some of the so-called jokes he delivered last night at the Smith dinner. And he gave an open endorsement to a key element of Project 2025 on education.
We're going to take the Department of Education, close it. I'm going to close it. We'll have one person, could be you if you decide to retire.
So let's say you have a liberal city, let's Los Angeles, San Diego, and they just decide we're going to get rid of that history. We got new history. This is America built off the backs of slaves on stolen land. Then and that curriculum comes in.
Then we don't send them money.
Did the brother on the set have any thoughts? Maybe not. People may wonder how we got here. That somebody this incapable could possibly return to the Oval Office. Well, for that, you can look at his performance on Fox this morning, which is a reminder that he is ultimately nothing more than a television performer. Being on TV is his comfort place, and that is largely because of his time on The Apprentice. If not for that show, which created the fictional TV version of Trump that audiences saw, he may never have wound up in the White House in the first place.
They're trying to take us back to a time of Jim Crow. This is more like Jim Crow 2.0 on steroids, of an authoritarian power grab that Shady Vance's own mentor, Curtis Yarvin, says Americans will have to get used to a dictator if they want a new government. And this hard-picked, unbalanced, rogue, conservative Supreme Court extended unchecked powers to these wannabe dictators, including the 34-time felon, twice impeached, racist, transphobic president. They have already begun, in many states, conservative states, to implement these ridiculous policies by stealing public school money, transferring it to the private schools. Trump abortion bans, IVF bans, book bans on both LGBT and Black history books and biographies, It's actually in the thousands. Last year alone, they banned over 4,000 more books. So by now, it's close to, I think, 6,000 books that have been banned already. As they push censorship and white nationalism and hide the facts from human history, including religious disinformation, lies, and indoctrination. MAGA is literally a cult. The followers have been programmed to believe only that Trump is, the honest one and telling the truth, and only to believe what he says, despite being a pathological liar that's lied literally millions of times. Many times lying to their faces, in the rallies and every time he's on television as well. And sadly, he knows that they'll never look into the facts and that they'll never realize that they've been duped. I'm going to play a couple clips here to show.
Trump references the enemy from within. Would a Trump administration use the military to go after people who oppose Donald Trump?
Oh, of course not. Of course not. Look, if you go back to the summer, look, ma'am, I'm glad you asked the question because I think it's so preposterous.
It's the guy in the brick suit that does it for me. J.D. Vance today said it would be preposterous to believe that Trump would turn the American military against the American people. What was it that Trump said this weekend again?
The people from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. And I think they're and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military.
Just checking.
Say this and what you envision as being behind it tactically.
Well, I think it's the sign of a great leader who understands he's in a terrific political news cycle. He's run a really good campaign from start up to this point. And the left's mischaracterization of Project 2025 had become a liability. I think we've seen that really turn around in the last few days since that statement. So no hard feelings from any of us at Project 2025 about the statement, because we understand Trump is the standard bearer and he's making a political, tactical
created Project 2025, a 900-page extremist blueprint for a possible second Trump term. The outline includes detailed plans to expand presidential powers even more, including restructuring the Department of Justice, purging federal government employees and replacing them with tens of thousands of Trump loyalists, dismantling the Department of Education, and banning abortion medication. The Heritage Foundation leader has not been shy about promoting this plan.
President Trump is going to make decisions about policy in his administration if he wins. Project 2025 is something that's going to transcend the next 4 years, the next 10 years. We're going to fire someone and the number needs to be more than 50,000. Abortion is not health care. We need to have the biggest mass deportation system ever in the history of America.
Roberts' promise of a, quote, revolution, underscoring the very real threat of authoritarianism corrupting American democracy. Words that ricochet throughout the MAGA movement and from Trump himself.
I am your warrior. I am your justice. And for those who have been wronged and betrayed, I am your retribution. I said I want to be a dictator for one day. We will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country.
Lock up the Bidens. Lock up Hillary.
If I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath. Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. It's nice to have a strong man running your country.
Joining me now is Dr.
Since he likes to deny his involvement and is even denying knowing anything about Project 2025, goes on to wish the authors well, which 140 of them, by the way, have been on his administration and are currently in his staff. He goes on to wish them well, and I have a clip where he's on stage with Kevin Roberts detailing how Project 2025 and the Heritage Group are putting together his next agenda and how they've been working very closely with him, as he's also been seen on his airplane traveling around with Kevin Roberts many times. Mark Meadows, and even J.D. Vance is an author of he actually wrote the foreword in his book as well. So let me play the clip.
This is a great group, and they're going to lay the groundwork and detail plans for exactly what our movement will do and what your movement will do when the American people give us a colossal mandate to save America, and that's coming. Heritage Foundation president, somebody else doing an unbelievable job. He's bringing it back to levels it's never seen. Dr. Kevin Roberts, like some on the right, severe right, came up with this Project 25, and I don't even know. I mean, some of them I know who they are, but they're very, very conservative. He's involved in Project, and then they read some of the things, and they are extreme. I mean, they're seriously extreme. But I don't know anything about it. I don't want to know anything about it.
They wrote a document that many of the points are fine. Many of the points are absolutely ridiculous. I have nothing to do with the document. I've never seen the document. I've seen certain things that are said in it.
This is a great...
And this is from 2022, the Heritage Group, and the following years after that, up until present day. I'm also going to play the clip of Kevin Roberts threatening a bloodbath if the left tries to stop them.
Coming to terms with the fallout from Monday's Supreme Court decision vastly expanding the powers of the president. Trump seizing on the decision, which bolsters and even worse, legally protects his worst impulses, while his allies tout the authoritarian future that they want to build if Trump wins again. Tonight, one of them raising alarms for saying the quiet part out loud.
We are going to win. We're in the process of taking this country back. We are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be.
That ominous warning was from Kevin Roberts, the president of the Heritage Foundation, the right-wing think tank that created Project 2025, a 900...
And again, Christians, get out and vote just this time. You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed. It'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore, my beautiful Christians. I love you, Christians. I'm a Christian. I love you. Get out. You got to get out and vote. In 4 years, you don't have to vote again. We'll have it fixed so good you're not going to have to vote.
Do you believe if Donald Trump were elected next year that he would try to stay in office beyond a second term? That he would never leave office?
There's no question.
You think he would try to stay in power forever?
Absolutely.
The stakes could not be higher. Trump says if he wins, you won't have to vote anymore. Tonight, we are laying 2025, the manifesto that would give him that authoritarian power, limit your rights, and force you and your family to change the way you live your life. And we begin this special episode of The ReidOut tonight with a dire warning for our democracy. Over the next hour, I will lay out the greatest threat to the American democratic experiment in modern times, and it's called Project 2025. With just 99 days till Election Day, and with voting starting sooner than that in some states like Pennsylvania, where early voting begins in September, it is imperative that every American understand what Project 2025 is about and how it would affect every single one of us if it was ever enacted. Tonight is just the first of many nights where we will dig into this dangerous plan. And I really want you to listen, learn, take notes, and share it with everyone you know. And if you look on your screen, you'll notice that QR code where you can find our segments on Project 2025 so you can share them. So let's start with the basics. This is the 922-page MAGA manifesto. We printed the whole thing out, and it's brought to you by one of the most conservative DC think tanks, the Heritage Foundation. This is the culmination of nearly 50 years of work that began during the Reagan administration. Broadly, according to Heritage President Kevin Roberts, this is a Christian nationalist plan to end what he calls the Great Awakening and, quote, rescue our kids, reclaim our culture, revive our economy, and defeat the anti-American left at home and abroad. This manifesto, which they call a book, is a specific roadmap on how to accomplish that by giving a Republican president unprecedented power. They do that by slashing the federal government's footprint, gutting regulations, slashing the money we spend on children, students, the elderly, the environment, education, and reproductive health care. Every single chapter describes in excruciating detail how to reorder our society by dismantling federal agencies and limiting the federal government's ability to help protect you, the American people, from predatory businesses, excessive taxes, poisoned air and water, you name it. Lately, former President Donald Trump and his campaign, fearful of how unpopular Project 2025 is, have claimed they have nothing to do with it.
I don't know what the hell it is. It's Project 25. He's involved in Project, and then they read some of the things, and they are extreme. I mean, they're seriously extreme. But I don't know anything about it. I don't want to know anything about it.
Yeah, but that's not the complete picture. Here is Trump promoting the Heritage Foundation and their little project just 2 years ago.
Heritage does such an incredible job, and they're going to lay the groundwork and detail plans for exactly what our movement will do and what your movement will do when the American people give us a colossal mandate to save America. And that's coming. That's coming.
Here's the other truth. Roughly 140 individuals who worked in Trump's administration are affiliated with Project 2025, including 6 former cabinet secretaries and 4 people who were nominated as ambassadors by Trump. The others were either key figures from his first transition, close Oval Office allies, or mid-level agency officials. There's Russell Vought, Trump's former Office of Management and Budget Director, who wrote Chapter 2 in the section titled Taking the Reins of Federal Government. In this chapter, he lays out how to consolidate power around a president's political vision. He explains how you can bypass Congress and only fund projects that ensure consistency with the president's agenda. He is rumored to be Trump's choice for chief of staff. And according to Politico, he and Trump speak once a month. Vought hopes his close relationship with Trump will elevate Christian nationalism as a focal point of a second Trump administration. Then there's Roger Severino, a former Trump administration DOJ official who wrote Chapter 14 about the Department of Health and Human Services and how to restrict abortion access across the country. Severino is a dogmatic anti-abortion militant who strongly believes that an America that allows abortion cannot
survive. Has an absolute role in this. There cannot be now 2 Americas. One America where unborn life is protected and another where unborn life is treated as the equivalent of medical waste. Yeah. Right. That is untenable. This has to be settled nationally. A house divided against itself cannot stand. Yeah. We can't have 2 classes of Americans.
In Project 2025, he advocates for using the regulatory powers of the Department of Health and Human Services, the Food and Drug Administration, and the Department of Justice and the National Institutes of Health to end access to mifepristone, prohibit stem cell research, and create, quote, pro-life task force in the White House. There's also Richard Hanania, who helped contribute to Project 2025. Now, he's not a recognizable name, but he's a popular conservative activist with fans like J.D. Vance, Peter Thiel, and Elon Musk, who just so happens to be a noted racist and sexist. The Huffington Post reported that Hanania used a fake pen name to write articles and social media posts that expressed support for eugenics and forced sterilization of, quote, low IQ people, whom he argued were most often black. And he dreamed about a white awakening, which is when whites en masse realize that they are superior to non-whites and that they'd be better off abandoning multiracial democracy for something resembling a whites-only ethno-state. While those guys are cooking up plans for how the government would work and who it would work for, John McEntee, Trump's former body man and former director of his presidential personnel office, is working with Project 2025 to build the enforcement army. He is currently a senior advisor at Project 2025 with the single task of creating a resume database of dedicated MAGA warriors to staff up every agency. Well, the ones that they don't shutter completely, like the Department of Education, on day one. Here's what McEntee wrote when he took the job. Quote, "The presidential personnel database will be of extraordinary value for the 47th president because we are doing a lot of the incoming administration's most important work ahead of time," unquote. Then there is Trump's running mate, Senator J.D. Vance, a self-described radicalized Republican who is a champion of Kevin Roberts and his plan to turn the Heritage Foundation into the de facto institutional home of Trumpism. Here you see Vance and Roberts together on a panel last year at an event hosted by the Intercollegiate Institute, which is a conservative organization for college students. This particular discussion was about regime change and the future of liberalism. Guess what else? Kevin Roberts has a book coming out in September, and J.D. Vance wrote the foreword to that book in which he praises Roberts' vision for America. He also wrote, "We are now all realizing that it's time to circle the wagons and load the muskets. In the fights that lay ahead, these ideas are an essential weapon." Vance's current political ideology lines up pretty succinctly with that of Project 2025, and his backing of Kevin Roberts, along with his frequent appearances on Tucker Carlson's talk show, might explain why he is on the Trump ticket. Campaign run might also have helped too.
I think that what Trump should do, like if I was giving him one piece of advice, fire every single mid-level bureaucrat, every civil servant in the administrative state, replace them with our people. Yeah, I mean, I think we got to do the hard work of institution building. And again, I've got friends who are working on this very problem right now, such that if there is a Trump administration round 2 or a DeSantis or a Hawley administration, that we actually have the bureaucracy in place so that that person can govern effectively and not be constantly undercut.
Trump, Vance, future staffers, future administration officials, and all of his former employees support parts or all of Project 2020. Tonight with damning new video from a former Trump cabinet member and key Project 2025 architect, Russell Vought, who confirms what we all know, that Donald Trump has personally had talks with Vought about his work behind Project 2025, and Trump gave him his blessing.
It's interesting. He's in fact not even opposing himself to a particular policy. Yeah. He's been at our organization. He's raised money for our organization. He's blessed it from the, I remember walking into our last day in office and told him what I was going to do. So he's very supportive of what we do.
This new audio comes from 2 investigative reporters with the nonprofit Center for Climate Reporting, who secretly recorded a nearly 2-hour conversation with Vought, who thought he was meeting with some high-dollar donors, which in and of itself is problematic in what it implies about the potential selling of access to an American administration.
Also, I just want to mention in one of those videos, Shady Vance had claimed that the Harris administration had handed out benefits to black farmers, and he was trying to be racist and saying racist stuff, basically because they had been denied the money that they rightfully deserved. And it was righted, the Biden administration, because there hasn't been a Harris administration yet. So already he's lying about that. He lied about the whole thing. And once again, it's a repeat thing. Both Trump and Vance are pathological liars. They're both narcissists and sociopaths, frankly, and they're incapable of empathy and compassion. The Project 2025 is a roadmap for Agenda 47. These are anti-American ideologies and have been in the works for the better part of 50 years. In a prior video about the Haitian immigrants, I explained how in 1987 they had wrote a book about the birth dearth and how if white people wanted to not become minorities by 2030, that they needed to ban abortions because 60% of the women that got abortions were white. So Jane Elliott had been warning and sounding the alarms on these lunatics for decades, actually. And I had shown a clip about that. Now, Justice Elena Kagan just announced at a forum that the conservative rogue Supreme Court was posed to remove and ban gay marriage, which had been rumored. And after they banned abortions, we kind of figured that that was next. And they're just going to keep on taking away our rights, unless we do a Supreme Court reform, which is desperately needed, which is why we need to vote Kamala Harris into office and give her a Democratic House and Senate. So we'll get the trifecta and get these legislation much needed for the people. But in addition to banning gay marriage, they're also considering banning interracial marriage, which is just crazy that I'm even saying that at 2024. Yes, they're trying to take us back to discrimination and cruel practices of our past. And if we don't stop them, they'll literally drag us back to the Stone Age. That's how far back they're trying to go. Elon Musk has even joined pushing disinformation, blatant lies, and propaganda, as well as Mark Zuckerberg targeting the liberal fact-checking sources and liberal posts and stacking the algorithms in favor of the conservative posts, especially Elon Musk, who's been on the campaign trail and even dumped $65 to $75 million into the Trump campaigns, forming a super PAC. And I guess he fired all of his campaign representatives that were in these battlegrounds and is redoing it's just a disaster. But in the process, he's also been posting very racist, xenophobic, and blatant right-wing propaganda tactics on the Twitter, formerly Twitter, now X platform, and using all of his billion-dollar empire, multi-billion-dollar empire, almost $1 trillion, as the richest man and flexing his oligarch might, because that's exactly what this is. He's now he's even been putting up ads online saying that he will pay such and such and bribing, which is a campaign violation and it's illegal, it's against the law. He's even been posting disinformation in reference to the FEMA disaster response and assistance, and putting lives at risk and violating Twitter's own policies, while, again, rigging the algorithms and the facts. This is not freedom of speech, by the way. It's one thing to be speaking, facts and telling the truth. It's another to be pushing sedition and just propaganda and lies. It's just not. It's terrible. And this is what the billionaire elites have been trying to do for a while, to reshape the government and institutions in their favor, and only, again, have them cater only to the elite 1% at the top. Meanwhile, everybody else, especially those of minority, black and brown, and LGBTQ, would be targeted. They want to take away and dismantle all of the liberal universities and institutions, removing our Constitution and fundamental rights and freedoms. I want to show another clip that takes a deeper look at Project 2025 and Shady Vance's personal involvement. Once again, Shady Vance, like I said, had also wrote the foreword part of Kevin Roberts' new book as well. I'm going to go ahead and play the clip.
Remember how just days ago Donald Trump was trying to distance himself from Project 2025? Here's what the author of Project 2025 just said about Trump's new VP pick, J.D. Vance.
We've confirmed news that Senator Vance is the vice presidential running mate. You will see a broad smile on my face because you may know that we're good friends. I will offer two comments about that. The first is the entire list of names considered are great men and women, truly. truly, all of them friends of Heritage. There, among them, though, was someone that privately we were really rooting for, and he's just been named the running mate. Why were we rooting for him? Not even because of politics and policy, but because of who he is.
And the reason Kevin Roberts is so happy about J.D. Vance is because Vance supports the principal tenets of Project 2025, like severely restricting abortion access and expanding presidential powers so that Trump would be untouchable as president. These guys might pretend they have nothing to do with Project 2025, but the authors of Project 2025 are already letting us know exactly how they feel.
They aim to take transgender healthcare coverage away, as well as women's healthcare, Department of Education, reshape the DOJ, FBI, CIA, and all other agencies to report directly to the president, or I should say dictator Trump. And I'll even show a clip of the training video obtained by Politico that shows these Trump administrations, the same individuals that denied any involvement, in a 14-hour video giving training tips and indoctrination tips on the new training of these 4,000 or up to 50,000 staff members that they're going to try to replace. And they've already been recruiting, I believe, at least 10,000 people for these positions so that they can remove the bureaucrats and replace them with sycophants. In a 14-hour video giving these training tips and indoctrination on why these anti-democratic and very authoritarian, draconian policies should be implemented.
Of these videos, some of which we'll feature today. In this clip, Trump's former deputy chief of staff at USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development, Bethany Kozma, discusses climate change.
Climate change, allegedly, is everywhere. And if the American people elect a conservative president, his administration will have to eradicate climate change references from absolutely everywhere. And according to our intelligence community, the #1 threat facing our country today is, drumroll, climate change. Not Russia, not China, not AI, climate change. This shows how the federal government is all in on this issue. And climate change activists wield a lot of power. This is an issue to pay attention to as it has infiltrated every part of the federal government. Now, when I think of climate change, I immediately think of population control, don't you? I think about the people who don't want you to have children because of the impact on the environment. Perhaps not everyone will make that connection, but after spending time in the international space trying to protect life, I can tell you that this is part of their ultimate goal, to control people.
That's conservative activist and former Trump official Bethany Kozma in a newly released Project 2025 training video. For more, we go to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by Andy Kroll, investigative reporter for ProPublica, whose new expose is headlined Inside Project 2025 Secret Training Videos. ProPublica has posted the full 23 videos, totaling more than 14 hours of content, on its website. Andy, welcome back to Democracy Now! Explain how you got the videos and their significance as we go through some of them.
Yeah, the videos come from the Presidential Administration Academy, which is one of the main pillars of Project 2025. We've heard a lot about, you've talked about on this show, the extreme policy proposals that Project 2025 put out in its 900-page Mandate for Leadership document. What's gotten less attention, but is no less important to Project 2025's long-term goal here, is to train thousands of future political appointees so that if a conservative president, which of course now means if Donald Trump, a conservative candidate, wins in November and we have a Republican president, that there will be a bench of thousands of vetted and trained appointees who can go into the government and fill openings in that government so that, as Project 2025 itself says on its website, that conservative administration can be ready from quote unquote day one. Now, these videos were provided to us by a source who had access to them. I won't get into the sourcing on it, but with any kind of situation like this, the key things for us at ProPublica are these videos real? Are they authentic? And are they newsworthy? Obviously, the substance is newsworthy. In our reporting process, we talked to people who are in the videos. We verified them, authenticated them, and fact-checked them ourselves. And now we've published on them. And as you helpfully pointed out, also published all of these 23 videos totaling more than 14 hours on our website. Anyone watching today can go and watch them now.
Andy, if you can just Project 2025, because, of course, President Trump has disavowed this, but meanwhile, the director of Project 2025, Paul Dans, a former top advisor in Trump's administration, has been forced to step down. And, of course, that book, which is headed by the head of Heritage Foundation, which is behind this blueprint, is now, they are putting off the publication of this with the foreword by none other than Trump's vice presidential running mate, J.D. Vance.
The Trump campaign has clearly come to the realization that Project 2025 and the policies that it lays out are extremely unpopular. And it's not really surprising to understand why. Just a few of those policies are, for instance, closing the entire Department of Education, further restricting abortion rights in this country, especially the mifepristone, also known as the abortion pill, slashing Medicaid, and then, of course, reclassifying tens of thousands of career government employees so that they can be more easily fired and then replaced by more loyal, vetted political appointees chosen by the next conservative president. So there's a reason the Trump campaign, however, as you pointed out, and as we report in our story, the number of connections between Trump's political operation and his administration from 17 to 21 in Project 2025 are many. As we write in the story, of the 36 different speakers in these videos, 29 of them have a connection to Mr. Trump. They worked in his administration across the government, the White House, National Security Council, a number of departments, including Justice, Interior, Health and Human Services, Office of Management and Budget, Presidential Personnel Office, across the board. There are people who ran his 2016-17 transition team that led him into the first presidency. And lastly, I would point out the Trump re-election campaign spokeswoman who sent us a comment reiterating in their view that there's no connection between 2025 and the Trump campaign. She herself, Carolyn Levitt, actually appears in the videos that we posted on our site. So it's really impossible to say that there is some bright line here between Trump's political campaign, his team, and this Project 2025 effort.
Andy Kroll just released. This is another Project 2025 training video featuring Katie Sullivan, who was acting Assistant Attorney General, Department of Justice under Trump. In this clip, Sullivan says the next conservative administration will need to eradicate all equity plans.
I think you can expect that equity and all of the equity executive orders under Biden will be repealed early in the next administration. This is going to require a very detailed plan to execute the eradication of the dictates in the equity orders. For instance, there's a gender advisor position created by one of these executive orders. That position has to be eradicated, as well as all the task forces, the removal of all the equity plans from all the websites, and a complete rework of the language in internal and external policy documents and grant applications.
And this is another Project 2025 training video featuring Dan Huff, former legal advisor in the White House Presidential Personnel Office under Trump, laying out how political appointees should be ready to enforce dramatic changes and face blowback when they do.
If the next Republican president does not execute a dramatic course correction, there may never be another chance. So if you're not on board with helping implement a dramatic course correction because you're afraid it'll damage your future employment prospects, it'll harm you socially. Look, I get it. That's a real danger. It's a real thing. But please, do us all a favor and sit this one out.
And this is another Project 2025 training video titled The Political Appointees Survival Guide. It features Max Primorak, a former deputy administrator at USAID during the Trump administration.
Now, in terms of a tip, survival tip. Do not let career bureaucrats hinder you from advancing the president's agenda. Keep in mind, you're coming into a place, Washington, D.C., that does not share your conservative values. They're even hostile to it, because you're here to do something that's not in their interest. They're not going to be your friend, and they're not going to help you succeed. What are you doing? You're here to cut government. You're here to cut spending. You're here to cut regulations. You're here to stop the waste, fraud, and abuse that's going on. But a lot of careers have been made from that. A lot of money has been made from that. Fiefdoms have been built around it. So you're going to get a lot of opposition here. It's an entire industry of opposition from lobbyists, professional associations, contractor groups, and disappointingly, faith-based organizations.
And finally, I want to turn to a Project 2025 training video featuring Alexei Walternist, a former Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs at the Department of Homeland Security. In this video, he encourages future appointees to avoid mainstream news outlets like the New York Times, the Washington Post, instead take their message to conservative media.
The American people who vote for a conservative presidential administration, they're not reading the New York Times. They're not reading the Washington Post. Actually, to the contrary, if those outlets publish something, they're going to assume it's false. So the only way to reach them with any voice of credibility is through working with conservative media outlets.
So Andy Kroll, investigative reporter for...
And even after Kamala Harris's victory, we have to make sure that these domestic terrorists literally plotting an all-out coup on our government agencies and institutions, that this ideology is exposed for what it is, and that people reject it for what it is. White nationalism, hate and bigotry, and seditious, war-loving lunatics have no place in our American democracy. We need to make sure that they are closely watched and evaluated, because they are the biggest threat to our democracy, in literally pushing for discrimination while publicly pretending to be the protectors, when really they're the perpetrators. And even using Russian bots to push this disinformation and lies. A lot of people are too lazy to read or to cross-reference or even fact-check, and many of them believe the pathological liar who's literally lied so many times we can't even count. It's in the millions. Trump denies Project 2025 by name, but at his rallies and interviews, he keeps admitting key points, like dismantling the Department of Education, as they say they want to replace it with political religion. In other words, indoctrination, mind control, and lies. And they have to dismantle the Constitution in order to do that as well, because the Constitution literally states separation of church and state. And as they have already been denying that the cruelties of slavery occurred and the simple facts of our past, this country was built on the backs of slaves on stolen land from the grounds of the Native Americans. Again, they are doubling down on whitewashing and discrimination and ideologies from the dark past, and even redefining the word woke, that for almost 100 years has been used by black and brown African Americans, mostly since the 1930s. It has been used to describe being woke and alert to racial injustices and the broken systems and social issues that have plagued our past. It's also evolved into a spiritual awakening of sorts as well, and many others refer or may have their own personal reference. But it's not what MAGA tries to redefine, and by pushing more fear-mongering and blatant transphobia and homophobia, by saying that it's in reference to sexuality or gender identity. That's just not true. Project 2025 is a blatant attack on LGBTQ, black and brown, and anyone that isn't a straight white male. It's also an all-out attack on wokeism, or what they call a wokeism. And the roadmap for the Republican leaders moving forward in both state and federal, which many of these policies have already begun to be implemented in places like my state of Iowa, where now being homeless is a crime. And if you're caught sleeping outside in a public area or park, or even taking a nap, you could be fined or taken to jail for being poor and homeless. Just think about that. That's terrible. As if they really have money to pay extra fines, or, as if they need the traumas of going to jail, etc. And at a time when the opioid epidemic has ravaged our country and families, causing many to lose everything that they own, Big Pharma has knowingly pushed highly addicting drugs onto the masses, and even made efforts to block legalization of marijuana, which is a natural medicine with healing properties, and Big Pharma prefers to keep people sick or in need of more meds. More meds equals more money to them. Then, after skating by unscathed the many deaths and lives that they've destroyed, they then make double time, because now people have to go to their methadone and Suboxone clinics for treatments. So they end up making more money and living a luxurious life as they destroy America. And frankly, they should be paying for a lot of the homeless shelters and affordable housing that are needed. It's the least that they could do, since they are the cause for a lot of these issues. But these top 1%, the same funding the MAGA cult and Project 2025, are some of these sociopaths incapable of empathy, compassion. They are truly the enemy from within that have poisoned the minds of the youth, and certainly the right wing, with propaganda machines like Fox News. Even the CEO said it's not news, it's entertainment. And Newsmax. Again, these are propaganda think tanks, and frankly, there is a huge difference between the Second Amendment, which, by the way, Project 2025 is aimed to remove the Constitution and all of our rights and freedoms, which includes the freedom of speech. But we still have it currently, and we will under Kamala Harris and Tim Walz's administration. Can't say the same about a Project 2025 Trump term. Between freedom of speech and it's a big difference, though, between freedom of speech and downright lies, smear tactics, disinformation, propaganda, and sedition. People need to start fact-checking and cross-referencing, because, sadly, there are a group of people obsessed with drama and negativity and totally consumed by propaganda by Fox News and these right-wing propaganda machines, whose own officials, like I said, have even in court appearances admitted that Fox News isn't news, it's entertainment. In other words, not based in reality or facts. I will leave you with more proof that Project 2025 is in fact real, and if you want the same rights, liberties, and freedoms, we must stand up together and say no to Project 2025. Authoritarianism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia. We must turn the page to a brighter future and a brighter tomorrow, and come together as a nation and as the neighbors and friends that we have for a long time been. We need to respect each other and, frankly, mind our own business, coexist, and frankly reject those who try to divide us and push the radical extremism and exclusion. Frankly, it's Trump that is feeding these dangerous lies and fear-mongering tactics, never speaking on policies. When he does bring up a policy, it's always an extreme one, straight out of Project 2025. Like mass deportation, dismantling and getting rid of the Department of Education, the liberal universities, etc. Oh, and also getting rid of the Democratic or the liberal left news media, turning the country into an American Nazi agenda, and locking all black and brown and LGBTQ as well as Democrats. By locking up all Democrats, and especially black and brown and LGBTQ individuals, regardless of party, for those individuals. Because frankly, they'll lock up Republicans that are black or brown and LGBTQ as well. Anyone that stands in the way of their agenda will be put into mass FEMA camps or deported. We have a chance to stand against a dictatorship and a bloody civil war that they're trying to bring, where they attempt to mass incarcerate over 83 million people, is what J.D. Vance has recently said in the latest. That's what it went from 11 million undocumented immigrants to them claiming, oh, there's got to be 20 to 25 million, to 83 million unlawful citizens. So in other words, deporting legal citizens as well. To mass incarcerate 83 million American citizens using the National Guard or military, as Trump has said out loud in an interview. I'll play the clip.
The people from within, we have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. And I think they're and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military.
Do a story on Project 2025, what it is, who wrote it, who will be affected, and how.
They call it Project 2025, and it is terrifying.
Project 2025 is a startlingly authoritarian form of the U.S. government.
What is Project 2025? An ultra-conservative agenda, the fascist playbook.
Project 2025 is a new paradigm.
Trump has distanced himself from Project 2025.
Trump is Project 2025.
The two words, Project 2025.
What I've been saying is that, one, it is a collection of hundreds of the most extreme and dangerous policies that Trump's party have been advocating for years and now are trying to put into action in 2025. Two, it is a recipe for regime change, to go from a constitutional democracy to the quasi-monarchical regime that the Supreme Court has been laying the red carpet out for. And three, it represents a civilizational death wish, because in addition to everything else, it pulls the plug on all climate action and progress we've been making over the last several years.
For me, the most chilling part of Project 2025, and you alluded to this, is that it seeks to place the entire executive branch under the direct control of the president, which would eliminate the independence of the DOJ and the FBI and the FCC and on and on.
So let's just start simple. What is Project 2025? Well, here's the easy answer. It is a playbook of policy recommendations for a Republican president on everything from abortion and the border to sugar and wild horses, derived and written by a powerful, long-standing conservative think tank called the Heritage Foundation.
It's a blueprint for a radical far-right takeover of everything in the U.S. government that, among many other scary things, proposes that Trump take direct presidential control of the entire federal bureaucracy, including independent agencies such as the Department of Justice. Trump's just going to fill all these positions with his cronies.
They are trying to make a king, a dictator out of the next person that ends up becoming president.
Trump is trying to distance himself from it, claiming, I know nothing about Project 2025, but I disagree with some of the things they're saying. Yet, I wish them luck. And curiously, I have no idea who is behind it.
These ideas aren't just bad, they're dangerous. They're dangerous for our country.
We are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be.
President Biden calls Project 2025 Trump 2025 and paints a scary picture of how Trump will use this plan to implement drastic policy changes that could impact freedoms, the environment, education, and pretty much everything else we love and hold dear.
Folks, Project 2025 is the biggest attack on our system of government, our personal freedom that has ever been proposed in the history of this country.
As we work to build a brighter future and to move our nation forward, there are those who are really trying to take us backward. And you, I'm sure, have seen their agenda, Project 2025.
Critics are calling it the fascist playbook, and it should be one of the reasons, if not the reason, that you vote this November. What's at stake here is not just a Republican agenda versus a Democratic agenda, as in years past, but democracy itself.
Another clip showing a military official giving us a warning about the military and how it could be wielded by Project 2025 into a weapon machine as described.
A new video from the group Vote Vets warns about how Project 2025 would enable Donald Trump's worst instincts when it comes to his role as commander-in-chief.
If one were to write a credible roadmap to transform our democracy into a dictatorship, this is what it would look like. And a big part of that is to turn the most effective, professional, and nonpartisan fighting machine that the world has ever seen into Trump's MAGA military force.
The moral compass of the United States Armed Forces is extraordinary. The great fear that some of us have is that he will in place a structure of firing, of dismissing, of retiring, and a selection process that will try to dismantle that moral compass. It's that which every voter needs to understand, and every voter needs to make sure he understands, she understands going into the voting booth on 5
Trump
November.
Starts fantasizing about throwing mothers with beautiful children into these mass detention camps, which is outlined in Project 2025.
And as soon as we grab, perhaps we take a woman with 2 children, 3 children. She shouldn't be here, but she's a nice woman. The children are beautiful. And all of a sudden it ends up being a front page story of the liberal newspapers. And you're right. It's a hard thing to do. Harder than a long time ago with Dwight Eisenhower, right? A lot harder. Nobody complained. In those days, it was, we had a country that was much different.
It's not that JD necessarily disagrees. I think he probably likes a bunch of this stuff, but he's recognizing that the way Trump is talking about it is not going to serve their cause well in this environment. And it's probably not going to serve their cause particularly well running against Kamala Harris.
So, before I end the video, it is imperative that we reject fascist corporate elite takeovers and the rewriting of our country under a fascist neo-Nazi plot to indoctrinate and push a pro-Christian white nationalist agenda, forcing Muslims and Hindus and all others of other faiths into an indoctrination of Christian white nationalist views, which they aim to destroy our Constitution and remove all of our rights. Please join me and the rest of the American patriots as we stand up and fight for our freedom, equality, and peace, and a brighter tomorrow, away from fear-mongering lies and discrimination from the conservative psychopaths. Thank you again, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Well, it's not too joyful, but I hope you learned something new, and hopefully we can share this and get the message around to the masses. It's very important that we get a lot of this out. It's mind-boggling that we're even talking about a lot of this, but it's imperative that people know the facts so we can stop it from happening. Thank you, and please, again, like my videos, and if you can share them, I'd appreciate it. Be sure to subscribe. Thank you so much for supporting my channel. And thank you for watching until the end. Have a blessed day.